Говорят, что где-то в лесу волшебном, где дремлют ясени старые, ходит оленёк.
They wrote on typewriters that they knew could be traced. In 1960s Russia, the state controlled all publication. Writing was a tool of the USSR, and other writing was punishable by prison, exile, or death. So writers went underground. In a regime that demanded people deny what their own eyes saw, they wrote about what they saw. They wrote about what they should do. And they passed what they wrote from person to person. Here's a Soviet writer speaking in a 1988 interview from Frontline.
It was simply a moral position. If I wanted to say the truth, I understood I would go to prison for it. I said it, and I went, and that's all.
How did writing threaten the Russian status quo? How did hand-typed publications of facts, passed hand to hand, make a massive dent in the Soviet regime? And what can we learn from Samizdat about how to make art as resistance today and tomorrow?
Бэмби, ты пришел ко мне из сказки. Бэмби, Бэмби, сказку сочинила эту.
From Rebel Yell Creative, this is The Art of Resistance, a podcast about channeling our rage and fear into creation, and using writing, music, and all kinds of art to resist the status quo. I'm your host and producer, Amy Lee Lillard, and I'm an author, podcaster, and Gen X kid who was obsessed with the Soviets and fascinated by artists who resisted. Today, I'm looking to make all the weird art and help others do the same.
All the time the censorship existed, but that was censorship in traditional sense. It was looking only for what it would delete. Soviet censorship, they demanded love. All authors was supposed to express love to the communism, to our leaders.
This is Vasily Aksyonov, a professor of Russian literature, in a 2007 interview. From the start, the leaders behind the Russian Revolution in 1917 knew the power of writing and art. Russia was already famed for its plays, novels, and poetry. The Bolsheviks behind the Communist Revolution knew if they could make art work for them, well, that's a massive tool that could keep them in power. So writing and art became an official partner in the revolution. Joseph Stalin took over after Lenin died in 1924. He sped up the revolution, forcing industrialization and collectivization across the vast continent, which ultimately ended up killing millions from famine. He built up the NKVD, the precursor to the KGB. He controlled Russia with a vice grip, and soon writers and artists were in his sight. Under communism, writers could have an official job as a writer, but that was totally dependent on government approval. And in 1934, the government declared socialist realism as the official rule for Soviet culture.
Партии и правительство дали писателю все, отняв у него только одно – право писать плохо.
That was writer Maxim Gorky at the official 1934 Writers' Congress in Moscow. He said, "The party and the government have given writers everything, taking from them the right to write badly. Books, movies, plays, all of them should talk about the glorious future of communist society, make heroes of ordinary people, and reflect reality. Of course, the reality the leaders demanded was one of enthusiasm, optimism, happy, happy, happy Soviets. Here's a clip from a 1978 documentary covering the USSR.
The Bolshevik revolutionaries recognized that the arts could be powerful tools in molding the new society. Motion pictures in particular were used to bring socialist ideas to the people. The fine arts of music and painting can also carry political messages. And since the 1930s, there has been no place for the artist who is an individual. All professional artists are workers and, of course, belong to a union. An artist whose work criticizes the motherland, its leaders, or socialism is certain to be expelled from the union. If that happens, there is no legal way for the artist to make a living. Art must be useful, and experimentation is discouraged.
The real reality of the Soviet Union at the time was one of terror. There had been many purges since the start of the revolution, where party members solidified their own power by claiming other party members were counter-revolutionaries. But under Stalin, the purges spread. Massive show trials convicted thousands of people and sent them to work camps far north in Siberia and other remote locations. Then it spread beyond the party to citizens who supposedly committed any number of crimes. It spread to people the Soviet Union declared suspicious, like Jewish people, ethnic minorities, religious practitioners. And the purges spread to writers who didn't show those happy, happy, happy Soviets. Over decades, the prison camp system, called the gulags, ultimately captured and killed millions. After Stalin died in 1953, the thaw began. Nikita Khrushchev, the new leader, delivered a secret speech in 1956 where he did the unthinkable. He denounced Stalin and all of his repression. Almost immediately, he relaxed the unwritten rules of Soviet art. But people weren't sure. In the shadow of the past, they wondered, what can we really talk about now? What art can we make? What can we critique? And what would get us sent to a prison camp? Because the rules had never been clear. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn later wrote in his Gulag Archipelago, the people who were punished and sent to camps never actually saw the law. No one besides the party, and sometimes even them, knew what was legal or not. And ultimately, the truth didn't matter anyway. So under Khrushchev, officially approved writers gingerly tested the waters with slightly more free expression. And unofficial writers turned to the growing underground. The underground consisted of novels, stories, poems, essays, and memoirs, passed on typed pages secretly from person to person. The pages were typed again and again by hand to make multiple copies. It was called Samizdat, a combination of self and publishing in Russian. The publications could be about anything. That was the intoxicating allure, a bit of freedom that would have meant arrest and maybe even death before. So some of the writers, at least at first, were not necessarily critical of the USSR. They were just not allowed to publish. And like most writers, they wanted someone to read their work. The key was to be very careful about who you passed a copy to. Soviet citizens were pressured to report on their neighbors, their friends, their family members, Even if people didn't actively snitch, if they were caught up in an arrest for some inexplicable reason, they could be tortured to report anything untoward. By the 1960s, Khrushchev and the party started to rethink the thaw. Official, not underground writers were increasingly being put on trial for pornography and anti-Soviet art. Then in 1965, Article 70 declared anti-Soviet propaganda and agitation illegal, and those who did it bound for prison. Two well-known writers, Andrei Sinyavsky and Yuli Daniel, were arrested under this new code. They were convicted and sent to labor camps in Mordovia. Soviet citizens talked about this time period in 1988.
People our age lived through the disappointment of Khrushchev's times. That was a time of bitter disappointment.
At this point, many writers working underground, no matter what they believed at the start, now turned against the regime. And Samizdat increasingly became a critique of the Soviet way. Writers used Samizdat to basically talk shit, resulting in more arrests, which drove more writers, which resulted in more arrests and writers sent to camps. But now, none of that was publicized. The arrests and any trials that did exist, they were secret once more. Some writers were actually sent to mental institutions instead of labor camps. Natalia Gorbanevskaya was one of them, arrested for her poetry. After a stay in the Kashenko institution, she immediately started plotting. She wanted something new and even more dangerous, a collection of Samizdat, an anthology publication, a newspaper that people could turn to for the truth. Natalia put together a journal called the Chronicle of Current Events, known as the Chronicle. She used notes she collected from friends and contacts, who had been arrested, when, and if the contact knew where that person was now, and if they were alive. Natalia's goal was to help readers and creators see the patterns of oppression, the big picture you couldn't see in state-owned publications or from the state itself. She wanted to pull together all the different niches of Samizdat: anti-Soviet writings, religious writings, other ethnicities, political dissidents. And she wanted to get more news to the West, tell the world what was happening in the Soviet Union. In 1968, Natalia wrote the first issue on her typewriter. Because the government could track every typewriter's keystrokes, she paid to have it altered. She made 6 copies and gave them to friends to copy as well and to spread on. Then she burned her notes, and she started on the next issue. The writing in the Chronicle was stripped down, focusing just on the facts. She wrote about the writers who were arrested and put on trial. She listed who had been expelled from work or kicked out of the party. She wrote about searches, arrests, and sentences to the Gulag. With each issue, it felt more like a network of organized resistance. Because ultimately the USSR thrived on secrecy, and brutal repression made sure that secrecy continued. So a publication that simply showed the secrets and the lies and the hypocrisy was revolutionary. As a Russian man discussed later in a 1988 interview.
Our decision to leave, of course, protest of style of life here. It is atmosphere of double thinking and constant lies.
As the chronicle spread, more stories came Natalia's way, written on notes passed from each person back and back and back to her. The chronicle kept expanding, and the West started reporting on it. BBC and Voice of America even read issues on air. A new section appeared in the chronicle, talking specifically about the camps. Relatives who were allowed to visit their imprisoned family would come back with news of what was happening. How many prisoners were there? Where did they sleep? Were they given enough to eat? What were they forced to work on? And all of it went into the chronicle. But because it kept spreading, so did the risk of being found out. And so did the threat level to the KGB and the state at large. They arrested Natalia in December of 1969. They sent her to another mental institution, where she was diagnosed with sluggish schizophrenia, a term made up by Soviet doctors. The main symptom, thinking her actions were right. They had a trial without her, and in January she was shipped to the special psychiatric hospital 500 miles from Moscow. She'd actually reported on that place for the Chronicle, and knew prisoners were strapped to beds for 3 or more days for any offense, like refusing to take their meds. Natalia was eventually released in 1972, and she left the USSR in 1975. She lived in Paris for the rest of her life. But the Chronicle continued with new, rotating editors all through the 70s, and it made the government enraged. The KGB and the government finally rounded up everyone involved in Samizdat in the early 1980s. They crushed the network. Around that time, though, the new premier, Gorbachev, saw the tide turning. He said transparency and truth, or glasnost, had to be the new way. And just a few years later, the regime collapsed. There are some critics and scholars who say that Samizdat led to glasnost, that then led to the downfall of the USSR in 1991. Because once citizens got that taste of free expression again, they weren't going to let it go.
Everyone's afraid of one thing, that it will all get covered up again. That already happened once, more than once. And to keep them from covering this back up, we need to push this thing that's happening now farther and farther open. Then it'll be impossible to cover it back up.
But for those living every day in the 1960s, knowing that their writing could get them killed, what would that 1991 denouement mean for them? The people who weren't writers, who lived under even more oppression than normal because of their religion, their nationality, who knew passing along information could get them killed, what would 1991 mean to them? At the time, while it was happening, writers had to focus on the impact that writing had on themselves. They had to write to stay sane. They had to write so they could feel whole, like a person who wasn't split in two. No matter if they wrote for a drawer or for a few copies passed to a few readers, they wrote so they could feel alive. And isn't that really just as important? To make us, the creators of art, feel alive. To make us feel like we can survive even in the midst of horrific things. Many readers who saw the underground writing of Samizdat, even if it was in copies they received in secret, had to read quickly and pass on, those readers then knew that art survived, no matter if the state allowed it or not. That fact still existed, no matter what the party said. They knew that thought could not be controlled, no matter if repression returned. The readers knew there were others like them who saw another way. That's one of the beautiful things about art as resistance. It can help the creator and the audience nurture and love their true selves, no matter if those selves have to stay hidden for a little longer. What can we learn from Samizdat? What can we do as creative people in this fucked up world? Because we are all creative, we can all find ways to resist. It's a scary time right now for the US press, for publications, for speaking your mind. And it's very scary to think where that will go in the future. It's terrifying to think about our police state continuing to grow, to demand the kind of loyalty the USSR demanded of its creatives. But I don't tell the story of Samizdat to scare us. For me, it's a reminder of how important creating is, how we need it no matter what. We need to make the art, write the thing, learn as we go, because we all have a voice, and someone needs to hear it. So here's what we do from here. We prize the truth and we tell the truth. We understand the power of using our voice and making our art for our own survival. And we don't think of this as short term. Even if we get a new administration down the road, even if we miraculously come out of this terrifying, tyrannical moment, there is so much to fight against and for. This is a long-term commitment to making art for a better world.
Еще не сорваны погоны и не расстреляны полки. Еще не красным, а зеленым восходит поле у реки. Им лет немного и немало, но их судьба предрешена.
The Art of Resistance is a podcast from Rebel Yell Creative. To make art that matters, every creative person needs support. Find yours at rebelyellcreative.com. This is Amy Lee Lillard, and I wrote, narrated, and produced this show. Check the show notes for all sources, and head to rebelyellcreative.com for full show transcripts, art, and more. I'll see you next time.